Imagine a child born with no parents, no language, no teachers, no civilization. Just an island. It is the story of a 12th century philosophical novel written in Islamic Spain by Ibn Tufayl. Its name is Hayy ibn Yaqzān, meaning alive, son of the vigilant. And the book's journey from the shores of Al-Andalus to the heart of Europe would quietly help invent a new way of thinking about truth, faith, and dissent. Hayy grows up alone on a deserted island, raised by animals. He learns by watching, by touching, by experimenting. He studies the movements of the stars. He dissects animals to understand life and death. He reflects on cause and effect, motion and rest, and slowly, without revelation, scripture, or clergy, Hayy reaches astonishing conclusions through reason, that the universe follows discoverable laws. Eventually, he encounters a religious society, and he makes a surprising discovery. Reason and revelation are two sides of the same truth. But Hayy also notices something else, something uncomfortably familiar. Some believers are sincere, others are hypocritical. So Hayy does something radical. He leaves society behind and returns to the island, where he first found God using only his mind, his senses, and his conscience. When Hayy ibn Yaqzan entered England, it spread like a spark along Europe's hidden intellectual networks. The decisive moment came in 1671, when the Oxford Orientalist Edward Pocock the Elder, working alongside his son, produced a direct Latin translation from the Arabic manuscript. They titled it Philosophus Autodidactus, the self-taught philosopher. For years, Americans have argued over a deceptively simple question. Were the Founding Fathers devout Christians, or were they secular men who wanted religion pushed to the margins of public life? In contemporary debates, the two options are often framed as opposites. On one side, patriotic insistence that the founders were Orthodox Christians. On the other, the confident assertion that they were Enlightenment rationalists who shed religion entirely. The trouble is that neither of these portraits tells the truth. The leading figures of the American founding, Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, Madison, and others, were neither doctrinaire Trinitarians nor secular unbelievers. They had a strong faith in God, convinced that Scripture contained moral truth, persuaded that providence guided human affairs. But the faith they practiced was not the orthodoxy of the creeds. It was radically simplified, rational, non-Trinitarian. This sometimes called Unitarianism, sometimes deism, and sometimes, especially in an earlier English form, Socinianism. To understand where this faith came from, we have to leave America entirely. The origins of this religious worldview do not begin in Philadelphia or Boston, nor even in the salons of the European Enlightenment. They reach back to a fascinating and little-known current in 17th century England, where the works of John Locke, Isaac Newton, and the early Unitarians circulated quietly, sometimes secretly, among dissenting intellectuals. Their voices echoed the theology of the Socinians, a movement that had already challenged traditional Christianity in Poland, Transylvania, the Netherlands, and finally in England. And the Socinians themselves were not working in a vacuum. Their rationalist theology took shape in an intellectual climate increasingly influenced by Islamic thought. Now, let's dive into the story. John Locke had been a student of Pocock at Oxford, and he later served as tutor to his son, Pocock the Younger. Locke read Philosophus Autodidactus before writing his famous work, an essay concerning human understanding, and before developing his thinking on Tabula Rasa, the blank slate. Ḥayy was therefore not a distant curiosity to him, but an early companion text, one that quietly shaped how he would later think about the formation of knowledge, reason, and the human mind. Let me put this simply. Locke's ideas took shape within a tradition that traveled from Arabic philosophy into European intellectual life. Locke's writings traveled fast forward until it reached Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau took what had once been a story about self-discovery and turned it into a full educational system. What Ḥayy had dramatized through narrative, Rousseau would later recast as a philosophy of education itself. So what began as an Islamic philosophical story ended up shaping how the modern West teaches children to think. Hey friends, just a quick note based on a few questions I've received. First, the Substack page includes full transcripts and academic references for the Stories Untold series. Please check it out. Second, yes, a great deal of time goes into producing each episode. What you experience in 15 minutes of storytelling often took 100+ hours of research, writing, editing, and production. So if you find value in it, please share it. There is no production support for this project, so I rely on you. Thank you. Let's go back to Locke's teacher, Pocock. Pocock's intention in translating Ḥayy was strategic. His translation foregrounded autodidacticism in the kingdom. It challenged the traditional authority. The effect was immediate and contagious. Almost as soon as Pocock's Latin appeared, a Dutch translation surfaced in Amsterdam in 1672. Soon after, a leading Quaker, George Keith, published his translation. And in 1708, Simon Ockley released the most influential English version. Even the title announced its Enlightenment promise, the improvement of human reason exhibited in the life of Hayy ibn Yaqzan. By the early 18th century, the Arabic novel had ignited a wave of enthusiasm across Europe. Printed in multiple languages and editions, Hayy ibn Yaqzan came to be recognized as a quintessential forerunner of the Enlightenment. And here is an interesting anecdote. In 1690, when his essay concerning human understanding finally came out, John Locke sent a copy back to Oxford to the man who had first shaped the way he thought, his old teacher, Edward Pocock. What Locke was really acknowledging was an intellectual inheritance, one that came through Arabic learning and through Pocock's translation of Hayy ibn Yaqzān, the very story that imagined the human mind as a blank slate, shaped not by ideas we're born with, but by experience, reflection, and self-learning. The gift, however, arrived too late for a written reply. Pocock was near the end of his life. His son had to answer in his place. He explained that age and illness had silenced his father, but not his gratitude. Locke's gift meant a great deal to him. The exchange reads like a quiet passing of the torch, as an Arabic philosophical story took root at the heart of the Enlightenment. Now we return to Europe, but to its most dangerous religious fringe. No group felt the impact of Ḥayy translations more than the Socinians, those anti-Trinitarian Christians emerging from Poland and Transylvania. The story calmly affirming exactly what Socinians believed, that reason, conscience, and monotheism are universal. The Socinians believed that God is one. Reason is central to faith. Ethics matter more than metaphysical mystery. The Socinians took their name from an Italian thinker, Fausto Sozzini. Near the Ottoman frontier, in places like Poland and Transylvania, their communities became real-world experiments in religious tolerance. There, they built a theology without mystery or coercion. They were forced into exile and persecuted across Europe. They were rejecting the Trinity, stressing moral responsibility, and reading Scripture through the lens of reason. Their ideas quietly shaped Enlightenment thinkers who came to believe that true religion is ethical, rational, and open to everyone. One story shows just how far their affinity with Islam could go. Adam Neuser was a Protestant pastor in 16th century Heidelberg, Germany. Once a respected preacher, Neuser became a leading critic of church dogma. In a bold move, he even wrote to the Ottoman Sultan, assuring him that he would find supporters in Germany should his conquest reach that far. Alongside another anti-Trinitarian thinker, Johann Sylvan, Neuser sought dialogue with the Ottoman world. The consequences were severe. Sylvan was tortured and beheaded. Neuser, accused of denying the divinity of Jesus, was imprisoned. He confessed under pressure but managed to escape. He later converted to Islam and traveled to Istanbul, where he entered the service of the Ottoman Sultan. In a remarkable autobiographical letter preserved in Heidelberg's archives, Neuser described his journey not as betrayal, but as an act of conscience. Martin Molso notes that throughout the entire 17th century, the Socinian movement became the specter of all Christian denominations until it slowly transformed into Unitarianism and liberal theology during the 18th and 19th centuries. Nowhere were these affinities more clearly displayed than in the Racovian Catechism. This Socinian confession of faith placed human reason at the center of religious life. It dismissed the doctrine of the Trinity, affirmed the absolute unity of God, emphasized Jesus' prophetic mission. The Catechism's journey through Europe was itself dramatic. First published in England in 1609 and audaciously dedicated to King James I, it soon provoked outrage, yet suppression only sharpened its impact. In 1650, John Milton, yes, that Milton, signed off on the Catechism while serving as an official licenser. It didn't take long for trouble to follow. He was hauled in for questioning, and Parliament soon ordered every copy it could find to be seized and burned. But the story didn't end there. John Biddle's English translation lived on, circulating quietly underground, and it would later earn him the title of the father of English Unitarianism. To Orthodox critics, the resemblance to Islam was too obvious and painful. The president of St. John's College in Oxford derisively labeled the Racovian Catechism as Racovian Al-Quran. Living in that age, Thomas Calvert stated,
"If any Christians turn Mahometans, they begin with Arianism, and Socinianism, and then Turkism is not so strange a thing."
Ironically, such perception was also shared by Ottoman Muslims themselves. Famous philosopher Leibniz tells a revealing anecdote, for example. A Turk listens as a Polish Socinian explains his beliefs, and then the Turk asks, almost puzzled, why not just be circumcised and become a Muslim? On this topic, I highly recommend Dr. Zulfikar Ali Shah's book, Islam and the English Enlightenment, an untold story. Now let's go back to John Locke, the thinker who marked a profound impact on American liberties. John Edwards launched a sustained attack on John Locke and the Socinians via publishing books such as Socinianism Unmasked and Socinian Creed. He accused the Socinians of aligning themselves with Jews and Muslims and of elevating the Quran by treating it as reconcilable with the gospel, provided that the doctrine of the Trinity was set aside. According to Edwards, the Socinians were in mere complacency with those infidels. He confronted Locke, the author of The Reasonableness of Christianity, first by branding him a Socinian and then, by implication, a Muslim. It is likely, Edwards wrote,
"I shall further exasperate this author when I desire the reader to observe that this lank faith of his is in a manner no other than the faith of a Turk.
Edwards particularly objected to Locke's claim that Christianity required only one essential article of belief, namely, that Jesus was the Messiah.
He seems to have consulted the Mahometan Bible.
Notably, Locke did, in fact, own a copy of the 1649 English translation of the Quran in his private library. It was a damning association to make, and Edwards was not alone. Charles Leslie attacked Socinians bluntly when declaring that the only reason they did not openly acknowledge Muhammad as one of their fathers was because the people would stone them. On the other hand, Lacroze, a French critic of Socinianism, claimed that the Socinians were already citing Quran as one of their classic books, even if their later followers were reticent to acknowledge this link. But the Socinians were not the only dissenters quietly turning away from Europe's religious gatekeepers. Another persecuted group was also reading Hayy ibn Yaqzān and looking east for inspiration, the Quakers. And through them, these ideas would cross the Atlantic. In the next episode